Let's talk this morning about that we are saved in order to be different. You know, most people think Christianity is just about behavior control. Don't drink, don't lie, don't cheat, don't do this, don't do that. And so a lot of times people walk away with the assumption, well, if I just manage my behavior, then I'm doing just fine. But what we find in Ephesians chapter 4 is that Paul does not start with behavior. He starts with the mind. He talks about the futility of mind, about having darkened understanding, about being in ignorance and having hardness of heart. Before he ever addresses conduct, Paul exposes thinking. Because the problem isn't just what we do, it's how we think. And how we think shapes who we can become. You can restrain behavior without ever renewing your mind. You can conform outwardly while remaining unchanged inwardly. And that's why salvation is not about becoming a better behaved version of yourself. It's about becoming different. Paul says, put off the old man. Be renewed in the spirit of your mind and put on the new man. That's not surface adjustment. That is identity transformation. And if salvation really means becoming different, then we need to see what that difference looks like. I want you to turn with me to Ephesians chapter 4. We're going to read verses 17 through 24 together. It is on the screen. It might be a little jumbled up there. I would encourage you rather read it on the screen. To open your Bibles and let us read together what God has to say. Acts, that's what I was teaching in class. Ephesians chapter 4, beginning of verse 17. This I say, therefore, and testify in the Lord, that you should no longer walk as the rest of the Gentiles walk, in the futility of their mind, having their understanding darkened, being alienated from the life of God, because of the ignorance that is in them, because of the blindness of their heart, who, being past feeling, have given themselves over to lewdness, to work all uncleanness with greediness. But you have not so learned Christ. If indeed you have heard him and have been taught by him, as the truth is in Jesus, that you put off concerning your former conduct the old man, which grows corrupt according to the deceitful lusts, and be renewed in the spirit of your mind, and that you put on the new man, which was created according to God in true righteousness and holiness. This is so much more than behavior management. This is being saved to be different. And Paul starts by addressing the old walk. And there is a very serious charge that he gives back in verse 17. He says, this I say therefore and testify in the Lord, that you should no longer walk as the Gentiles walk. Paul is speaking with apostolic authority. This is not a suggestion. He's not saying, you know, things would be a lot better for you if you tried doing it this way instead of doing it this way. This is a solemn charge that Paul is giving. This is a must-do. We mentioned last Sunday in our lesson the application of the word walk in the Bible. It means a lifestyle, a pattern, our daily conduct. So Paul is saying you cannot any longer live your life as the Gentiles do. Which means Christianity is not a mere belief. It is something that leads to a change in who we are. And so a question that we have to ask is, have we reduced Christianity to Sunday attendance and occasional participation. That outward behavior modification. Or is there actual visible transformation in how we live? The pattern that is our lives. Is it made effective by the working of the Word, or are we simply changing some behavior patterns in order to fit some theory that has been put forth? He gives this solemn charge. You cannot remain in a sinful way of living. And he describes what that looks like. He gives a very tragic condition of remaining in this way. He says it's in the futility of their mind. That's empty thinking. Life without God produces intellectual vanity. I really like how that's stated. Intellectual vanity. Oh, you may be the smartest person in the room, but without God, it don't matter a whole lot. When we have God, when we put Him first in our lives, we're going to be thinking properly. Not with an emptiness. He says, walking as the Gentiles walk results in darkened understanding. This is spiritual blindness. It's not a lack of intelligence. It's not that people, excuse the word, I know some don't like it. It's not that people are stupid. It's that they refuse to accept that which God has put right in front of them. It's a lack of light in their lives. Darkened understanding. Which results in alienation from God. Separation because of ignorance. Because the remedy is right in front of us. And yet we scoff at it. We say, it's not all applicable to me. I can change a few things and be okay. I can modify my behavior somewhat and be okay. That's still going to result in separation. And it's due to our own ignorance, rooted in hardness of heart. Ultimately, it leads to a moral collapse in verse 19. Paul says, past feeling. We have a desensitized conscience. Notice he said the Gentiles were given over to lewdness and uncleanness. Sin will escalate when conviction fades. It's never just enough. When you start chasing after sin, you will never reach the point where it's like, all right, I've had my fill. No, it's always going to lead to something else. And then that's going to lead to something else and something else. And you see the progression. The farther we chase after sin, the farther away from God it leads. And we become desensitized to the true evils of this world. Sin begins in the mind, it will harden the heart, and it ends in moral surrender. So here's questions that we have to answer for ourselves. Where have I grown numb? Where have I grown numb in my reaction to sin? And do not judge it by the tolerance of society. There were things that just not even a generation ago were readily agreed upon as being sinful, now being advocated and promoted. Do not base your ideals on what society is doing. Where have you grown numb as it regards what God has said? Are there things that we are willing to overlook because maybe it's not that big of a deal? Maybe we've made too big of an emphasis on this. It's being accepted by a lot of other people, so it must not be too bad. What is there that once troubled my conscience that no longer does? As a race, we have forgotten how to blush. As God's creation, we have forgotten what it means to be embarrassed by sin. What once embarrassed us now may not faze us. Why? Because we have allowed ourselves to be hardened. Paul says this is what it's like. Having a life patterned after the Gentiles. This is what the child of God cannot do. You can no longer walk as the Gentiles walk. So what's the question, or the answer to that question? How then? If I'm not supposed to walk as the Gentiles walk, then how am I supposed to? It begins with learning Christ. I want you to look in verse 20. He says, but you have not so learned Christ. Christianity is about learning a person. It's more than learning a system. It's learning a person. Jesus. Discipleship is relational, not merely academic. We are converted because of Christ. We are convicted because of Christ. Paul says, when you learn Christ, you know that it is improper to walk any longer as the Gentiles walk. If you do, if that is what you continue to do, then can you accurately say that I have learned Christ? It involves hearing and being taught by Him. In verse 21, if indeed you have heard Him, referring to Christ, and have been taught by Him, Christ, as the truth is in Jesus. It's ongoing instruction. We will have to make countless course corrections throughout our lifetime. Areas in which we may need to improve and make changes in order to avoid walking in that Gentile way. But truth alone is in Jesus. There's no other source. No other place can we go to find something that is going to be satisfactory. Jesus is truth. And so the world, in many ways, says, just follow your heart. Just do what makes you happy. As long as you are subscribing to an acceptable moral code of some kind, then that's all that really matters. Jesus says, follow me. He doesn't say follow your heart. He says deny yourself and you follow me. If I am actively following Christ, then I can be confident that everything is going to work out. I can be confident that I'm doing what I'm supposed to do. That I have subscribed to the right way of thinking because I am following Christ. So the transformation from old to new has to go through Christ. It can't come about any other way. That is the only means of going from the old walk to the new walk. And this is what Paul then transitions to. The heart of the passage in verses 22 through 24. Putting off the old man, he says. This can be likened to removing filthy garments. I've had some dirty jobs in my day. I was a service plumber for several years. I worked on a hog farm for a couple years. I know what it's like to come home dirty. I know what it's like to have your wife or your mom stop you in the garage and say, you ain't bringing that in here. You're taking that off out there and going straight to the shower. This is what Paul is saying that the old man is like. It's like those dirty clothes that you're wearing that have become corrupt according to deceitful lusts, he says. This is worse than what I came into contact with at the hog farm or on a plumbing job. This is spiritual filth. But see, sin will lie to you. It will tell you it's okay. It will tell you it's not that big of a deal, all the while decaying you. All the while, you may not recognize it. You know, there were some days at the hog farm when I didn't get all that messy, depending on what chores we had. There were some days where I could come home relatively clean, but buddy, I didn't smell like it. I'd walk in the house and Mom would be like, turn around. I was like, my clothes, I don't have anything on me. She said, you stink. You see, there are ways in which we may look at ourselves through the lens of sin and say, oh, I'm not that bad, I'm not that dirty. Sin will do nothing but decay. And so what must be intentionally removed from our spiritual selves? What habits, what influences, what relationships are we holding on to that contribute to the old man continuing to be present? See, this is harder than just getting rid of some dirty clothes, because this is active change that we have to make. Ongoing change. We have to constantly evaluate what is influencing me. What am I participating in? And is it in keeping with the old, or is it in keeping with the new? Who am I associating with? Is it going to try to resurrect the old, or is it going to encourage the new? After putting off the old man, we're not done. It's just starting, really. Paul says, be renewed in the spirit of your mind. Be renewed in the spirit of your mind. This is not only getting rid of the old man, the dirty clothes, but it's scrubbing yourself clean. The hog farm by far was the smelliest job I ever had. And I could come home. The way I would do it is I would get cleaned up at the hog farm before I even left. And I would put on the next day's work clothes and come home. That still wasn't good enough for Mama. She still made me take them clothes off out in the garage and go shower again. That's the cleanest I've ever been. But you wouldn't know it by smelling me. You see, what would have happened if I would have taken them old clothes off and just put them new clothes back on? Well, guess what? I still stink. Because the stink is not just superficial. It got into my skin, right? It needed to be scrubbed. Such is sin spiritually. We cannot just say, oh, well, I'll just change a few habits. I'll just make some minor tweaks to how I conduct myself, and everything will be okay. We have to get to the root of the problem, which is our hearts, our minds, and we've got to clean them. He says, be renewed in the spirit of your mind. That is an ongoing renewal. It's not a one-time, I've been renewed, therefore I'm good. It's a continual process. But it also demonstrates that transformation happens internally before it happens externally. This parallels with what he said in Romans 12 and verse 2. Do not be conformed to this world, but be transformed by the renewing of your mind. Not just the changing of some exterior things only, but by the transformation of your mind. That's how one changes. It is not behavior modification, it is mind renovation. That's what Paul is getting at. And he says, after you have put off the old, after you have scrubbed and are continuing to scrub yourself clean, worrying more about the inward than you are the outward facade, because if you change inwardly, it's going to be reflected outwardly. He says, now you put on the new. See, spiritual nakedness is not an option. We're going to be clothed one way or the other. We're either going to be clothed in the old man or we're going to be clothed in the new. And so Paul says, represent that way in which you are created according to God. Jesus gave a parable about a house that was occupied by a demon. The demon was cast out. The house was swept. It was put in order. Everything was back the way it was. But what happened? It was left unattended. And so this nice, neat house now became a gathering place for even more. The demon returned and he brought friends with him. You see, if we are not filling, if we are not putting on that which is good, we're going to put on that which is bad. If we are determined, I'm going to set aside the old man, I'm going to be renewed in my mind, then it must be reflected in what we put on. Righteousness, he says. That's right living. Righteousness is sometimes a word that can scare some people. But it's something we should very much be in pursuit of. Right living. Righteousness and holiness, he says, set apart living. We're different. We're set apart for a greater purpose. That is to glorify God. You see, when we put off the old man, when we are renewed inwardly and we put on the new, we are not just avoiding sin, we are taking on a new identity. And there's a big difference in how that looks in our lives. Just avoiding sin versus being that new person. I want you to notice with me that Paul did not say, just keep the old man. As long as you try, just keep the old man. Paul did say, put him off. Get rid of him. Paul didn't say, well, just improve your thinking slightly. Just change some things, be a little bit more positive, make a little bit better decisions, and you'll be okay. He says, be renewed in the spirit of your mind. He didn't say, dress up the old life. There's a phrase we like saying, you put lipstick on a pig, it's still a pig. That's not what Paul was saying. Don't just make your old life prettier. He says, put on the new man, which was created according to God in true righteousness and holiness. You see, salvation is not God polishing what you used to be. It is God recreating you into what He designed you to be. Maybe right now, maybe this morning, you recognize that you yourself, you are in the first half of this text. That you are in the part where we're talking about Gentiles. And we're talking about futility of mind, distance from God. Perhaps you have a conscience that has grown quieter than it used to be. The good news is, you don't have to remain where you are. Paul gives the solemn charge not to. And he says the path comes through Jesus and will result in a new identity.